Hi, welcome back. So if you, I'll just quickly recap where we left off. So we had basically gone to the database, authenticated the user, uh, came back with the user VO information back into the login controller, and we went ahead and added that into the HTTP session. And I said, now that we have figured out so many of these methods and method signatures, it's a good time to come back and get the class diagram back in sync. So I've just come back and added all these things. So if you note, uh, into the login controller, I added the method called handle login, which is a fully qualified signature, and so is the authenticate user method in the user service and the authenticate method in the user DAO. And if you know how Spring works, dependency injection works, user service will be a member variable inside a login controller, and there will be a setter method using which we'll be able to do setter based injection. Similarly, user DAO is going to be a member variable. So that's basically what I've added into the user service. Now that we have added this, now see how easy it is for us to actually figure out the relationships that actually exist. So let's look at login control to user service. So what is a relationship? It's an association, but is it a strong or a weak association? It is a strong association because user service, which is a dependent object, happens to be a member variable inside the login controller. So I'm actually going to go here, pick up the directed association link and drag it between these two like this. Similarly, between user service and user DO, even that happens to be a directed association or a strong association. So I'm going to use the same logic and draw this between these two. So now we've finished the relationship between these two. Now let's look at the relationship between login controller and login VO. Now look at the relationship. Login VO is the dependent object, but it is not showing up as a member variable, but it's something that's used within the scope of any method. So those are the kind of relationship or associations where we call it as a weak association, or in this case, as the tool calls it, it is actually a dependency. So all these I'm basically using from the videos that I showed you about notations about class and sequence diagrams themselves. I hope you guys remember that particular section. So using the same logic between login controller and user VO, it is again a dependency. So I'm just going to lock it this time, and I'm going to draw it between login controller and user VO. Why? User VO is something that shows up within a method scope, not at a member variable scope. So what's the relationship between user service and login VO? It's the same thing. What is the relationship between user service and user VO? Again, the same thing. It's actually a dependency. What is it between user DAO and user VO? Exact same thing, because the scope happens to be at a member variable. And finally, user DAO to login VO. It's the exact same thing again. Now, if you look at it, the reason we were able to do this or draw these relationships so easily is because from a dynamic perspective, from how the code actually works perspective, we've actually figured out the scope of it. And that is something that we did not blindly try and model even without understanding how it would actually work at runtime, correct? And that is what I meant by keeping the two diagram in sync. So there are some things that's best figured out at a dynamic level. There are some things that are best figured out at a compile time or a design time level. So you've got to find that right balance. And if you do that, and if you develop the two diagrams side by side, it will always ensure that these two diagrams will always be in sync. So this is the right way of going about developing the diagrams. And the reason the sequence diagram actually helped us is this. Once you are actually writing this sequence diagram, it's as good as writing pseudocode for the actual code that's actually going to work, correct? Now, while you were writing the pseudocode, that's what made you think about how the signatures or what methods need to show up where, what the signatures need to be, and so on and so forth. And this, when you're actually doing this is what we mean by visualization of a design. Now, you're actually thinking about all of this, but you do not have code in front of you, which is an extremely important point to think about, which is the real purpose of what UML is all about. If you remember the first section that I talked about, UML, more than documentation, is about how you think about a design and how you use it to communicate with something else. So It is these diagrams that help you think at a higher level of abstraction, and these are the ones that will help you communicate the design that you actually are thinking of to anybody else. It could be a teammate, it could be a developer who's going to consume this particular design, or it could be any technical member who's interested in how this particular part of your code or your particular system works. So that's the importance, and this is how you go about developing these diagrams in parallel. We are not done yet though. If you note, we are actually back at the login controller. But before we go to the home page where we need to show a list of bookings, we actually have to go back to the database and pick up all those booking information for us to complete that for that particular page. So that's what I'll complete. But I'm going to do that as a next video, just in the interest of time. So I'm going to take a break here. I'm going to finish up both the class and the sequence diagram for the second half of the request response cycle, and I'll come back and explain how I went about doing that. So I'll see you in a bit.